Hello and welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original in the order of release. This episode, we have Netflix's 165th film from 2019. It's the spy thriller, The Red Sea Diving Resort. It's directed by Gideon Raff, stars Chris Evans, Michael K. Williams, Haley Bennett, Michiel Huisman, Alessandro Nivola, Greg Kinnear and Ben Kingsley. I'm Jesse, and I'm here with MJ. Hello.
How are you, mate? You derailed yourself then on the on the pronunciation.
I was trying to be clever, and it just didn't work.
You're doing a good job too.
Yeah, thought I'd try and put some accents in there, and it just I screwed myself up. That's okay.
Alessandro Nivola. That one's pretty straightforward too.
It's very straightforward. Anyway, we're here to chat about a film with Chris Evans, which is pretty exciting. Bit of Captain America in the house, and I'll put it out there early. We're probably going to spoil this film if you don't know this story early on, because I think maybe going in without any context would be nice for this one. And I did struggle throughout to not just in my notes writing down it's Captain America, but we'll go from there. And we do like to start our show off with our fast flicks, where we do a quick summary of what the Red Sea Diving Resort is about. So what are your thoughts on this one?
I know Chris Evans is obviously Captain America, but for me, I fell in love with him when he was in The Losers. What was that? That was probably like 2007, 8, 9, something like that. And he was just so funny, and he'd like bulked up from like his Not Another Teen movie days, but he was just hilarious. And I was like, oh, Chris Evans is kind of great. And then he became Captain America, and he became who Chris Evans is. But he's always in my head. He's always going to be that character from The Losers. And he was so funny in that. I'd recommend anyone. I've got a soft spot for that film. He was in
some rom-com with the chick from Scary Movie, was he? Is that?
Yeah, Anna Faris. Yeah. It's called What's Your Number? I've actually got that on Blu-ray.
Oh, really? Yeah, that was my I remember that clearly of him being a younger, not as cool character.
Yeah, real comedy. Like he went at the real comedy route for a while.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Fast flicks. Hit us up.
Red Sea Diving Resort, though, is based on a true story where Israeli agents run a fake diving resort in Sudan to covertly free Ethiopian refugees from local savages.
Good. It's very hard to be any different to you. So it's a group of agents helped through some agencies to purchase a rundown resort in Sudan to help smuggle refugees to safety.
I had no idea what this movie was about. I remember it when it came out, and I remember it was a big film, Chris Evans, bit of action, all this kind of stuff. And when I started watching it, I was just like, hang on. This is not. I didn't know it was based on a true story. I didn't know it was about a war-torn country. I had no idea any of this stuff. I thought it was just like an action thriller about these people who had this big fight at a diving resort somewhere. And that was it. So I was completely led astray.
I'd listened to a true crime podcast a couple of years ago that actually went through this story. So the story was familiar to me, which I don't know whether it added anything to the watching of this film, but I definitely I knew the story and the background. But obviously listening to a podcast gives you different visions of what you expect to see, and my memories of this was that it was a grand resort. So obviously I got that completely wrong, because this resort was anything but nice.
That's fair.
We should talk about how this was put together and how it appeared on Netflix. So fill us in on some background behind this.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of already started talking about it, but it's loosely, the film itself is loosely based on the events of Operation Moses and Operation Joshua, which together are referred to as Operation Brothers. And that operation was where Ethiopian Jews were covertly moved from refugee camps in Sudan to Israel during the 1980s. I think it must have been late 70s and 80s. I think this movie was started in like 78, 79. Anyway, so the actual resort itself was abandoned. It was called the Arouse Holiday Village on the Red Sea. It was located roughly 70 kilometers from Port Sudan and was managed by the Mossad operatives until 1985. So it was going for quite a while. And we kind of first heard about this, I say we, the general public first heard about these operations when Gad Shimron released a book in 1998 called Mossad Exodus, the daring undercover rescue of the lost Jewish tribe. But it has been said that this film itself isn't necessarily associated with the book. But I'm sure with all covert operations by any kind of CIA type group, you're not supposed to reveal this kind of stuff until way after it's happened. So that's probably why it's came to light in the late 90s and sort of coming to light more and more now. So what I can gather, it was August 2015. Fox Searchlights had purchased the rights to the film. They began developing, or the announcement of the development was in March 2017, so a couple of years later, and Gideon Raff was on board to direct. He'd already written the screenplay, and Chris Evans and Haley Bennett also on board in the cast. The filming actually started in June 2017, took place at the Cape Town Film Studios in South Africa and Namibia. And whilst part of the development was done by Fox Searchlight, by the time that actually shot the movie, it was already out of Fox Searchlight. They'd already moved on from it. They shot it as an independent film. And by the time Netflix came on board to acquire it, the movie was actually already edited and basically completed. And that was around February 2019. So nearly probably a year and a half, 2 years when they actually started filming was when Netflix came on board with the distribution rights of a film that had essentially already been made. So it had its world premiere at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival on the 28th of July, 2019. And then it was released on Netflix 3 days later on the 31st of July. And I think it's worth pointing out that there have been a few negative reviews. Some critics have sort of called them out for putting forth this whole white savior narrative, basically privileging the roles of the Israeli Mossad agents led by Chris Evans' character. Gideon Raff said in the statement that the Ethiopian community were true partners in this operation and they are the real heroes of the story. And he noted that it was important to him to cast actors from the Ethiopian community in the film. But I totally understand that criticism. It sort of does scream out a little bit, the whole white savior when you are watching the film. Not to say that that may not have been what happened, but clearly there's a lot of Ethiopians or a lot of Sudanese or Ethiopian people who played a huge part in this actually being successful. So that's what I've got so far.
So, yeah, nice summary altogether. I don't have an awful lot extra to add. I think, as you mentioned, after it did hit Netflix, it did play another film festival in Poland in November of 2019. So it did have another theatrical release a little bit later on. I guess just back to that idea of the operation sort of, and obviously when we see films like this, I think we did a film a while ago called The Angel, which sort of was the same sort of, well, it's not the same sort of film, but it still covers sort of undercover operatives and things like that. And there's always going to be things that are edited out or changed to protect identities and things like that. And in particular, some events in this one probably were portrayed a little bit differently to, for a film length feature time, because, this whole operation ran, like you mentioned earlier, from 1979 to like 84. So as we see in the film, there's these boat evacuations that occur, and realistically, these were too slow. And in the film, it sort of comes together that, Ari has this idea that let's fly them out, sort of thing. But in reality, there were 17 airlifts of flying people out, not just the one big dramatic one at the end of the film. Like, this was something that they were able to do over and over again. So, just little bits and pieces that you've got to change to make a film and make it engaging for an audience. You can't. I mean, they showed a montage of it with the boats, but obviously doing that again with the planes probably wouldn't have worked as well. Tagline. Did you say the tagline for this one?
No, I didn't.
I had two. So, and they're both on the same poster. So the first one says, "Inspired by real events." Yeah, okay, thanks.
That's not a tagline, though. That's just letting you know that it's just.
Well, then the second one is, "In the 1980s, one partnership saved thousands of lives." So that were the two lines on the poster.
They do work well together, actually.
Yeah.
It's a bit dull.
That's why they're both on there together. So very dull, very boring, very monotonal. The translation. So obviously we mentioned before about it that it was called Operation Brothers. That was the alternative title across the world for this in many countries. The only other good one that I could find was in Japan. It was called Miracle Rescue Plan. So that was a nice little positive spin on this one.
I think the Japanese get it right so often with their titles.
Very, very literal.
Big fan. Yeah. What's this movie about? Oh, it's about hero. Whatever you just said it was. I can't even remember.
That sticks in your mind. I had a percentage match for this one.
So did I.
Good. All right. What fill us in? What did you get?
I had 78%, which I normally get pretty high percentage matches because I always forget to put the thumbs down on movies I don't like. But yeah, I got 78%, and that's fine.
I got 67, so a little bit lower. So we'll have to work out and see whether Netflix are on track when we give our overall scores at the end to see whether we match up. All right, consensus time. What are people saying about this film?
Yeah, it's quite different between IMDb and Letterboxd, which doesn't surprise me. But it's a 6.6 out of 10 on IMDb, 27,000 ratings, and a 2.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd, just under 10,000 ratings. The thing that got me was how few people have actually seen this film. I remember it coming out. I kind of thought it was a big-ish release for Netflix. Chris Evans is a massive draw card. It just surprises me that not that many people have actually seen it. I mean, they're not terrible numbers, but for what this movie is, they're pretty low. But 6.6 is great for IMDb. 2.8 is modest, probably a bit under par on Letterboxd. So it's kind of hard to get a good read from those numbers, but it's middle of the road, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I really surprised me the Letterboxd numbers too. I thought I didn't think that this would be under 10,000 at all. Like you'd be thinking with some of the Netflix films with big name cast members, like you mentioned, you got a lot higher numbers. So bit of a surprise. And if we head over to Rotten Tomatoes, the critics definitely didn't like this one. Sits at 29% on 41 reviews. So rotten, but in a big contrast, the audience has it at 78%. So a lot higher, and that was on over 500 on Rotten Tomatoes. That's really high for Rotten Tomatoes. So
not bad for Rot.
So audiences in general are seeming to enjoy this a bit more than your critics, I guess.
I just had a quick look then, and we did the movie Secret Obsession last week, which is a festering turd of a film, and that had 15,000 ratings on Letterboxd. So it had more people on Letterboxd watching Secret Obsession than this. So that would be disappointing for Netflix.
I think so too. Let's lead into our early thoughts on this one. Fill us in on what your thoughts are.
I generally did enjoy this. I couldn't help but think of it as a poor man's Argo in so many aspects. And when that first thought jumped into my head that like, oh, this is really similar to Argo, I couldn't shake it at any point, because every time something else happened, I'm like, oh, that's what happened in Argo. And I kind of get that. There's probably just a lot of similarities to these two missions that actually happened, where they pulled out a fake event to try and save people from a country that anyway. But it just makes me wonder if this film actually gets made, if not for the success of Argo. And look, for what it's worth, I loved Argo. And whilst Red Sea Diving Resort was a pretty decent ride, it just lacked a bit of punch. It lacked a bit of urgency. Certainly lacked that breathlessness that you get when comparing it to a movie that won Best Picture. Don't get me wrong, but and I think it's interesting that you mentioned about the the 17 airplane evacuations. This film never felt like it had a climax, and I think in the story there probably never was a climax, and they had to reinvent it. And I could feel that was missing.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, like I knew bits and pieces of the story from listening to a podcast a couple of years ago, and I think it's a really good story to see, but I'm sort of on the side a little bit with some of the critics that we've probably seen of this film, in that I wanted more context behind the need for the refugees fleeing this civil war, rather than just the whole focus being on the rescue efforts. Like it's great to see that, but you need to have the context behind that, rather than just being like, they're being chased, so we need to get them out. Like, give us a bit more background knowledge rather than just a short voiceover at the start and at the end. But I think it was still an engaging film, and it was still well made and well performed and looked nice. It's just the narrative, I needed a little bit more from it.
I totally agree with that. And I'm going to plead massive ignorance here that I didn't even know that there were Ethiopian Jews. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't necessarily know why they were there, and I didn't know why they had to come out. Like you're so true. You have to just take a leap of faith that go, well, this is what they have to do because it's what they have to do, and then just go with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, talk about some characters in this one. I've struggled with this. I don't know how you've gone, but let's. There's a whole variety of people in this film, but probably we'll only focus on a couple, I'd say. So, who are you going to start with?
Well, I also wanted to say, and this has nothing to do with. Well, maybe it does have something to do with the film, but it always annoys me when IMDb lists the casts in order that they appear on screen, and I'm sure it is reflective of how they appear in the credits. But it's really, really frustrating for me when I'm actually, whether I'm researching a film afterwards, but even jumping onto the film just to see who's who, because you do jump on IMDb quite a lot in a film, and it just annoys you when like the first 4 people are like they don't even have their little picture on IMDb, like they've never done anything before because they're in the movie for 12 seconds. It just annoys me. So come on, get it right.
Yeah, nobody's.
We're obviously going to start with Chris Evans' character, Ari Levinson. I think it's worth noting Ari Levinson isn't a real person in real life. Obviously, just generally based on the people that completed these missions. But look, he's a flawed hero, but he's flawed in the sense that he's blinded by doing everything he can possibly do to free these refugees. So if that means abandoning his own wife and daughter or disobeying orders from people who are in charge, subsequently risking his own life basically on a daily basis, then he'll do it. Like that's how he's flawed, which is kind of commendable. But he also goes about things the wrong way sometimes, and he arguably takes unnecessary risks that kind of align with his real brash and reckless nature. And the film does try to acknowledge his flaws, and they reference them quite a bit. But when you cast Chris Evans in this role, you can only go so far as to see this man isn't like the perfect hero. Like, yeah, he's doing the wrong thing, but oh God, he's got such good intentions. Like he's America's sweetheart, right? He's Captain America. So the audience is going to love him because it's Chris Evans, and his recklessness therefore gets heralded as bravery. For me, when people do stupid things to escalate the plot, you can only win me over so far. Like when the plot escalates because the story is so airtight and the protagonist is completely cornered, then you've got my attention because that's the direction it has to go in. But when they get themselves in trouble because they do stupid things, it kind of loses me a little bit. And that's what happened a fair bit in this movie with Ari.
Yeah, I think everything you've said is 100% correct. And I'll just hark back a bit on that idea that is not real. So it's a composite of a whole bunch of different people from this time. So realistically, the writers of this had the ability to create this character almost with whatever traits they wanted, with whatever ability, whatever they wanted to do. And for me, the idea that they are tying that idea that he was a refugee himself, and like you mentioned, struggling with that connection with his daughter, and they try to make that connection through him rescuing this one kid, and the recklessness that you spoke about, and the impact that it has on Sammy because of this leave no one behind attitude. I need to do the right thing. These are all fine, like you mentioned, all fine, but they don't do a good job of connecting them all well enough or tying them all in to create this character that obviously, like we've mentioned, it's Chris Evans. So you've got to have, of course, you're going to have an up and a down moments and struggles and things like that. But it was like they were almost just like little dropped in here. Oh, we better drop something in at the start so we can have a connection later, and we better have something that actually connects him to the refugees. Whereas maybe you didn't need all of that. You just need this guy that's doing the job because he loves the job and he wants to do the right thing, rather than adding all these extra layers in if you're not going to cover those layers properly.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. And they had that freedom to do whatever they wanted, and they kind of almost got greedy with it and couldn't keep it together.
Yep. Excellent. Who else would you like to mention?
I want to talk about Kabede or Kabede. Apologies for the pronunciation. And I do still have a little bit of trouble really figuring this character out, because arguably I think he's the real hero character. And his decision to stay and help whilst he's not tied to the baggage of disobeying orders or abandonment of family, it's based on the fact that his life is literally dedicated to saving these people. And if he saved 100,000 people when he still had another 100 people left, then there'd be no question about his next move, no matter what the risks. It's kind of like he's the cleansed version of what of what Ari is, but I don't feel like we get enough from him. I think it's almost just like, yeah, he's just so good. This guy's really good, and that's all we kind of get. And I wanted a bit more.
It's like they sort of left him out from a huge chunk in the middle that we could have followed along a bit more. And like I mentioned at the start too, that's the sort of the side of the story that's probably more important, is to see what he's actually doing with these peoples in that refuge, and the work that he's doing to get them there in the first place. And we understand, like, it's almost the background behind him and Ari, they're almost too similar in their save everyone at all costs, whereas you sort of need a little bit of a differentiation between them, whereas you want to make Kabedi the actual hero of this film and show us some more flaws in Ari instead. I don't know if that's I don't know. It's a tricky one, because obviously, like, when I was looking at this guy's actually probably one of the characters that's actually based on a real character. So he's based on this activist from Ethiopia called Feredi Aklam, and he was, I feel like if you've got a real person, then you can, that fake character or the composite character, you can change a bit more.
It's a great point as well, particularly when you do talk about the whole white savior of this film. We take for granted that Ari Levinson had like 300 people on a nightly basis just delivered to him so that he could smuggle them out. But the work that went into getting them to him in the first place would have been astronomical. And it's kind of glossed over. And I guess that's where they've missed a beat when making this film, because maybe there's a true hero story there, and maybe that doesn't resonate with the Western audience. So, I mean, that's a decision that you make, right?
All right. Anyone else?
I do want to talk about Sammy. I know there's lots of characters and I can't really glean much from them, but for me, Sammy was the voice of reason in this film, and definitely the character that I identified with the most. I think they probably glossed over a little bit was the work that he actually does and his ability to want to be there and put himself in danger to help. And I think that coincides with his pretty logical hesitance to take these risks. I think everyone else is heralded as, you're so great because you didn't think twice about going in and helping. I think it's kind of normal to think twice about putting yourself in these situations. And I think throughout the film, he's the one who's providing that logical path forward, and he gets ignored pretty blatantly. And he eventually cracks, which I like too. I feel like a lot of the audience would have identified with him. And I think that's why this character works and why he's actually really, really important to make this film function properly, or otherwise it is just almost like a hero film that you can't really relate to.
I think it was nice to see sort of the resent that he held towards Ari gave you that opposite to, to feeling like, yes, this guy is a little bit over the top and a little bit too irrational sometimes with his decision making. And I think the one thing behind him a little bit, I probably wanted one clear understanding as to why he just follows Ari so blindly. I just wanted to say, what is it about your connection to him? Like, yes, we know you want to do good, but you can do good in so many other ways as well. So what is it about following Ari why do you have to do that? I think just one little bit, that a little bit more behind that than them having worked previously in the past.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree. I think this film could have really benefited from actually focusing more on this character and why he feels the way he does, because then you actually see the proper holes in Ari as opposed to just seeing them on the surface. And that's why you still have to walk away from this film going, oh, Chris Evans just played a hero in this film. What a great role that was. But if you actually focus more on Sammy, all they do is have that little, and that kind of, I really liked the scene where he just went nuts at him in the jail cell, and they obviously ended up having a fight. But the end of that scene is just them going, oh yeah, we had a fight. That was it. And I think that was a really good opportunity to really open up and go, hey, this is a really flawed hero. Like, you can read between the lines and see how flawed Ari is, because Sammy is the one that's actually exposing it. And yeah, there's something romantic about him that you do want to follow him. Let's see it more. Let's show it more. So you're 100% right. I think not just for this character, but I think it elevates the film in general.
There was a whole range of other characters. Is there any that you wanted to, like, there wasn't a lot of context behind the rest of them, but is there any that you wanted to touch on?
There's actually not. And like, Ben Kingsley's in this film, and I wanted to talk about him, and I'm just racking my brain. I'm like, he's just a nothing sort of character. And I thought Greg Kinnear, maybe there's something there, but there's not really. It's all what you see is what you get, I think, with these characters.
I had them all listed, but there's like
So did
even the other partners. It's like you didn't really learn much about, apart from
No.
Rachel, maybe, who was sort of that steady mind. But the other two blokes didn't really add anything at all, other than just being there.
No. I was expecting more from Rachel too. It kind of just went nowhere with her. She became very much a bit part when I thought she was going to be more.
The director, Gideon Raff, anything that you found out about him?
He's born in Israel, so obviously there's a connection to this story. And I think I read him saying something like he grew up knowing this story, not necessarily the ins and outs of it, but he was very familiar with the idea of the Ethiopian Jews and getting them to Israel in some capacity. But he's a writer producer on Homeland, probably his biggest credit in the industry. And apart from a couple of small horror-esque movies in 07 and 08, this is his only directing gig on a feature film, I believe, but he's done a fair bit of TV.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll echo is lots of writing for Homeland and directing like some episodes of Quantico. So probably leads well to him getting this film and those, it's the same sort of style and genre that you can see from those TV shows in this as well.
Yeah. Well, he wrote this as well, right? So he's obviously invested in the story.
Okay. Scene time. What are some scenes in this that you enjoyed?
You're going to hate this. There's one thing that I did like, and it's really, really cheesy. And I don't know why I liked it, because in some films I wouldn't like it, but I just liked it in this film. They had so many times where they kind of assembled in like a hero shot formation. It happened like the first time, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then they just kept doing it. I'm like, you know what? I'm in for it.
It's like the one on the beach where the camera just like goes across all their faces, and I was like, oh god, they're the Avengers, are they?
You imagine there's like these spots in the sand. It's like, all right, by the time the camera's here, you need to end up there, and you need to look brooding over into the distance. I don't know. I kind of like that in a real cheesy way. I thought the first run they did was pretty good, and I'm talking about the way it made me feel, that the thriller sort of elements to it that elicited emotion. The first run they did was pretty good when you sort of figure out what we're actually going to be doing and how it's going to work. And I was sort of sure they were going to fail, and I didn't want them to. I thought that would have been a bit too cliche. So the idea of them succeeding with that first run actually felt really good to me. But then I also realized that it's based on a true story, and they probably just did succeed over and over again, and that's why this hasn't been a movie until now. And then on from that, I don't normally. Sometimes I do. That's not fair, but I really liked the montage they had with the Duran Duran, hungry like the wolf. I actually liked that montage because it gave you context of the scope of this. Because watching the film, you're not sure whether this is a task that, okay, we've got to get two groups of people out and we're done. But then you sort of get the idea like, this is really very much an ongoing mission, and we need to try and keep this sustainable in some capacity. And they actually did that really well without laboring the point. So it works for me. Yeah, you go.
I didn't. That was the one thing in this movie I did not like.
The montage.
Nah, compared to the rest of it just was a bit more cheesy. Like especially with the transition from the song into them singing it around the campfire, and I don't know. I understand, like, to do a montage to show the everyday workings of what they were doing on that resort. That's good. Like that'd work fine. I just feel like that the song just didn't really fit. Anyway, that's me.
I think that actually tied in with the tone that you expected that this resort was trying to, or the vibe that this resort was trying to give off. But again, it was, I guess, a little bit jarring to the tone of the film itself. But I guess that's why I think it did work.
It wasn't the lead-in scene before that was the one where the colonel was sort of questioning the people in the village, wasn't it? So you go from this really heavy scene. I'm pretty sure it was around the same sort of time. Like you go from this heavy scene into that, and I don't know. It just Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it may have been. I'm not 100% sure. I feel like it was more transitionally clean, but I can't quite remember now. The only other scene I do have is the final sequence. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was worth mentioning, them trying to get out on the plane, and it did take the colonel and his team quite a while to get there. It felt like they seemed pretty close the whole time, and it all kind of came together quite nicely. It wasn't a groundbreaking scene, but it's worth calling out.
Cool. speaking of montages before, I didn't mind the montage of Ari getting the crew together. It was almost like an Avengers-esque. Let's pick everyone out for their abilities and bring them together to create a super team. So I thought that was a bit of fun.
There's a bit of triple frontier about that.
Yes, that's very true. The tourism industry dude, I didn't mind the scenes with him. I thought it added a little bit of humor into what was not a very humorous film at all, and a bit of life, bit of energy. As you know, especially in his office when they're giving him the bribe and then helping them escape from the jail too. I just thought that he just added something that wasn't really there in anything else. The other part, I guess, this is a funny one. So there's a scene where Ari gets out of bed and he's got no clothes on, and I was like, hang on, did I just miss checking out Chris Evans' junk? So I paused it and replayed just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. I like that scene.
This isn't a Chris Pine kind of thing, mate. We're not.
No, it wasn't.
That's America's ass, remember?
Yeah, true. And the last thing that I thought was done really well was that dinner scene at the resort when the soldiers rock up. It was really tense. I felt fear for those refugees that they were, trying to move around the resort while they're sitting there, and it was just. I think it was apart from the colonel's interactions with the waitress, which I didn't really like. I think that the rest of the build up around getting them down to the water was well done.
I think the colonel's interactions with the waitresses worked because you got to see. I mean, you already knew they were a threat, but what a terrifying threat they actually are.
Yep. Yeah, good point. All right. Anything that you didn't like?
Yeah, not as much as I thought. This might sound harsh, but when the woman who drowned herself at the start, it just bothered me that Sammy was like 2 meters away from her, and then he couldn't find her. Like she was so close, and then all of a sudden she was so far. I don't know. Let's just call that like it was poorly shot in some way because it didn't feel believable. Like I thought it was just someone who's going to commit suicide in America, or the white people are going to come save the day again. But
and it wasn't like the water wasn't like it wasn't a flowing river or anything like that. It was pretty still.
Yeah, it just didn't really work, did it? And the other thing, again, I think this scene annoyed me a little bit because I feel like I missed Chris Evans talking to his daughter in the film about the connection that they have with the Ethiopian Jews. It just went over my head. I think he had like one line on why they should be doing it, and I was hungry for more. But I also felt like his daughter was too old to be drawing those pictures of her family and then whooshing airplanes around. I get that it had a nice little transition where it turned into she had the branding and everything on that airplane, but she seemed way too old to be doing that kind of stuff.
Good point.
Also, the idea of her sending him the picture at the end of the film with him in the what's happened in the past 5 years for you to be like, you know what? That's my dad. We are a family again. It's like, you haven't seen him. That was strange too.
Yeah, I had that as well. I think that especially like he received that letter a lot earlier. And so he had so many moments.
That's right, yeah.
Just for this dramatic part at the end, I'll definitely open it up. Like, yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, that was it for me though.
All right. Yeah, I mentioned the montage before. I'm putting this in here just because for context, and it's not that I didn't like the scene. It just brought up bad memories, and maybe it's because it was well done. But that scene at the end where they're all getting on the plane, it just brought back memories of the recent thing in Afghanistan with trying to get all those people on that plane at the same time. There's some of those shots that just look so similar to something that's happened in 2021, and I don't know. I just feel like you needed the pilot sort of kicking up such a big deal about, I can't fit you all in, and then they spend a couple of minutes taking out all the chairs and things like that. It doesn't add anything to the story. It's just like open the plane, get them on, and go. Because obviously, if you know the story, there's more than one plane, and it didn't add anything further to the chase from the soldiers because you knew that they were going to get out. So just a little bit more tight, especially when the film's over 2 hours. It just didn't add anything.
I agree with everything you're saying. What they would have liked to have happened when they're editing this film is that tension is just so high that you're sitting in your living room yelling at the TV, just like, pull the chairs out, pull! Like, true. Yeah. I can't watch Argo without that last scene where they're trying to get onto the plane and not just be in absolute like sweats. And I remember watching that at the movies, and I've never done this before, but and literally on the edge of my seat. Like by the time that scene finished, I like took stock of where I was. I'm like, oh, that's why they call it on the edge of your seat, because I had moved forward into my seat, and that's what they would have wanted to create. And you're right, they didn't create that.
Do it. Yeah, good explanation. Thank you. That was good. Themes and ideas. What's this one saying?
Yeah, like in a really literal way, this is the idea of right versus wrong. That question comes up so often in the film, and that idea is very much guided by the political decisions that govern these movements, and then that just dictates what can be achieved when you've got a moral decision versus a political decision. And I think so much of this film is like, we can't do any more because we're being pulled out. All right, let's start again and regroup. And then finally, in the final scene, it's appealing to Greg Kinnear's character and go, look, the political decision isn't to bring a plane in and free these people, but you know what? You're a human. I'm a human. What do you want to do about it? And you do have to make that moral decision from time to time. I do kind of appreciate that there was no romance in this film. Like no one really had a romantic connection with anybody, which is so rare in films. Just to even have one little flitter of connection with two characters that you sort of show. And that wasn't there at all, because it would have not been relevant, or it would have gotten in the way of the story they're trying to tell. So I did appreciate that. But yeah, there's a heap more.
I did almost think that maybe there was something, because on the plane at the end, was it Rachel was like leaning on Jake or Max or one of them, and I was like, maybe they tried to put something in there and they just decided to leave it out. But yeah, I think good point.
But yeah, that like there's obviously the whole idea of murder and genocide and the historical aspects of this film, but yeah, there's a bit in it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. They're doing the right thing, and they make it clear right at the end too with the refugee issue in the world. Like they just, I guess, even if this film highlights the issue that the current world still faces, and it was like 65 million displaced people in the world still. Like that's a lot of people in a current society that don't have a home, that they've had to flee their home. So and I think that the sad thing about this is that the theme of this film should have been the idea of why these people are fleeing. So like racism, anti-Semitism, and that they should have been the driving force of this film, and they're not touched on. So I think that is a little bit of a negative thing, when they could have quite easily been incorporated into this through this idea of being a hero, except making other people the hero rather than a white dude, I guess.
Yeah, no, you're right. That makes a different movie, and probably a better one.
Yep. What did you take away from this?
Look, one thing they did really well was I always get that feeling of unease when you're in a foreign country with different rules, and you never quite know what you're doing and whether it's the right thing or whether you're going to get in trouble. They actually created that very, very well. I definitely felt that so often in the film. Look, the other side of what I take away is that I've learned something watching this film. I was wildly unaware of obviously the hardships that these Ethiopian Jews in general have gone through, let alone this mission itself and what actually took place. So that's something that I take away and something that I learn. I think when I look back on this film, I don't think I can ever shake off the Argo comparisons. I think whenever I think about it, I'll be like, oh yeah, this was that Argo film. Because that's what it felt like. You know, so much of it felt like that. But there is other components that will stick with me.
I'm going to be repetitive here, and I'm just going to say, I'm taking away from this film that if you're going to make a film around such an important issue and cover the evacuation of people, you need to give context to the reason behind why they're being evacuated, or give the story of those people. And to me, that's the takeaway from this, is that you can't tell a story like this without telling the story of the people that you're putting forth. So that's all I'm taking away.
I think it's a limitation in the film, and I think there's going to be, and probably why the critic scores are so low on Rotten Tomatoes, for example. But on the flip side, there's some really high audience scores who are more than happy to take that leap of faith. And I know people that would watch this film and go, yeah, that was a great film, I really enjoyed it. It's like, so why were they taking that? Why were the Ethiopian Jews trying to flee? It's like, oh, I don't know, they were just in danger. And sometimes that's enough for audiences. And I wonder, they just got to a point making this film where we're like, we're just going to rely on that and hope that the entertainment factor gets the rest over the line, which, you know, you could argue that the scores there's enough people that did like this film, and that's what they took out of it. But I agree with you, it limits the film in a big way.
And I'm not saying that I disliked it because I think it was still a well-made film, and the performances were still good. It still looked great. It's just that idea of I just want something a bit more, especially when this type of film.
Yep.
IMDb. Did you go on to look anyone up that you recognised?
I had a great one for this one, Jesse. Sammy comes on screen, played by Alessandro Nivola, who don't recognize the name, but I saw him like, it's that guy. Like, I know that guy. Like, what is he in? Expecting to jump on IMDb and see like 5 things and be like, yeah, it's that guy. And I'm flicking, I'm like, I haven't seen anything that he's done. Like, he was in A Most Violent Year and he was in The Eye with Jessica Alba. I've seen these films. I'm like, I'm not recognizing him. And I kept scrolling. Jurassic Park 3. He's Billy in Jurassic Park 3, which I've seen that, a number of times. And it's just occurred to me, I've never really noticed him afterwards, but I know it's Billy from Jurassic Park 3. And that was, it was very satisfying to discover that.
Amazing. That's a really good one, especially with you with Jurassic Park. So well done. I didn't jump on to check anyone out. So that leads us into question time. Are there any questions that you wanted to ask about it?
I've only got one, and it's not a great question, but the first thing that popped into my head in that airplane evacuation scene was, where do you reckon they got all those glow sticks from? Because it just didn't seem like the sort of place that there were hundreds of glow sticks lying around.
When I was watching, I thought exactly the same thing because, you see them with a couple, like, cool. They've got a couple in like an emergency pack, but then there's like a shot that goes up and there's like hundreds down the runway. And then what happened to the tree? They're like, there's a tree on the runway.
They just went over it. They got they almost hit it.
So I don't understand, like, why make a comment about the tree being on there if, like, it's not even going to impact it anyway. Anyway, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but they obviously just went to the $2 shop and got a bunch of glow sticks. But they could have showed at that shopping mall because I didn't see it.
Maybe they have lots of rave parties in Sudan. There's lots of glow sticks. I've only got one as well, and I just wanted to say, would Netflix have expected this to be Oscar bait?
Ooh, I doubt it. Because the film's finished by the time they pick it up, so they've seen it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you watch this film and think this is gonna win many awards. That's my thought. Maybe on paper before it gets made with the cast or with Chris Evans and actually Greg Kinnear and Ben Kingsley is actually not a bad cast. On paper, maybe there's something there, but by the time that they came on board, it was and the fact that Fox jumped off, is probably not a good sign either. So I wouldn't have thought so.
I don't just that whole the idea that Fox were producing it as an independent film and Netflix jump in. You got a good cast. It's a story, like you mentioned, that's similar to Argo. And this is that time where Netflix were, pushing sorts of films that they wanted to get sort of awards recognition. They
still are.
They still are, obviously. And, even in the, like we've done a lot of, even last week we did that shocking film and that was still nominated for some sort of award somewhere. This got nothing at all, which I just, not even an editing award or a best location award or something like that. It just, I don't know, just felt a bit weird that there was nothing at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. I don't think, for what it's worth, I think it's a good pick by Netflix. I think there's enough in this film to go, hey, we got this thriller. Let's call it a suspenseful thriller in some aspects about a true story with Captain America starring and a couple of other really familiar faces, and just you got to watch it in your living room. This feels like actually a really good get by Netflix, really smart get. And look, it did okay, but I reckon, not that we can find out, but the money they would have paid for it potentially probably wouldn't have netted the results they would have liked.
Especially with the numbers of eyeballs that we've seen that have rated or logged this anywhere.
Yeah, they'd much rather watch Secret Obsession.
Thank God. Let's kind of wrap this up. This is where we put our ideas together for a average out of 5 finish for us.
Yeah, look, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was pretty engaging, and to me, it surprisingly didn't overstay its 100. It didn't overstay its welcome with 130-minute runtime. It lacked any real punch, and you feel like they had to work really hard to make this what is a really impressive true story, but it doesn't matter so much on the screen as a historical thriller. They just didn't quite do enough to really get the heart pumping and the palms sweaty like you could have imagined they could have done with this film. But It's still 3 stars for me.
Yeah, I feel like everything. I've been feeling very repetitive this time. I haven't got an awful lot of different things to say because it looked good, well made. The things like I've mentioned are the issues with the narrative and the point of view from the story. So I think this story needs to be told. People need to hear this story to hear that there are still so many people displaced in the world, and the more evidence of trauma that the Jewish community have gone through. So I'm still giving it a 3 as well. So it gives us a 3. It's solid. It's a solid film.
What do you think about the runtime? Because I didn't hate it. It was kind of all right.
Yeah, it didn't drag. There weren't times where I was constantly checking how long to go. I mean, considering it, like you mentioned, it's over 2 hours. I don't know how much more they had. There was a lot left on the cutting room floor, but yeah, I mean, I can't really see a lot of it needing to be, tightened up at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've got social, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the question I had to pop on there for socials, we've already covered it already, but did you find this problematic because of the white savior narrative? And I think we've both sort of covered that already.
Yeah, I recognized it watching it and kind of thought it left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, but it certainly didn't derail the film for me.
No. Good. All right. Well, we will be back again next week for another film. We've got a comedy next week. So switching up from 2019, it's called Otherhood, directed by Cindy Chupak. It stars a good cast here: Angela Bassett, Patricia Arquette, Felicity Huffman, Jake Hoffman, Jake Lacey, and Cinqua Walls. So that's what we have next week.
Never heard of it. This will be interesting.
Me either. I've got no idea of this one. So we'll come into it with open eyes. I mean, Felicity, a good trio of middle-aged female cast, so it could be a good one.
It is interesting. The last 3 or 4 films we've done have been such different films, and that's the beauty of Netflix, right? They don't have they're catering to everybody, and that's what a great audience to have when you've got everyone in the world in some capacity wants to watch one of your films.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one then.
Yeah, so am I.
Excellent. Well, as always, it's always nice to debrief and discuss our thoughts. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Sounds good. See you then.